Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You sent us something pretty cool this time. The Istanbul Fire Department's Firefighter's Handbook.
hmm
It's from 2022, the İtfaiyesinin kitabı. Now, at first glance, it's a pretty straightforward technical manual, but trust me, this thing is absolutely jam-packed with interesting details.
It really is. Yeah, what's fascinating to me is, it's basically like a practical guide, this handbook, but it actually gives you this incredibly rich look into how urban safety has developed over time. For anyone who's ever thought about how a big city like Istanbul protects itself from fires, other kinds of emergencies.
Right, and so that's our mission today. We're going to dive deep into this handbook and try to pull out the most valuable, most interesting pieces of information. Think of it as like a shortcut to understanding how this really important organization functions. Not just like the nuts and bolts, but like the historical, the journey, and the principles behind it all. And trust me, we're not just talking about hoses and ladders here, although there are plenty of those. We're going to talk about the historical roots of the Istanbul Fire Department, going back over 300 years.
Wow.
We'll look at some of the cutting-edge gear they use today, and even there's a firefighter's prayer in this handbook, which really sort of grounds the technical aspects in the human experience.
Yeah. And when you think about it, it's really amazing how, Istanbul, this huge city, it's constantly changing. And the fire department has really, met the challenge of keeping everyone safe. And they've adapted and constantly worked to improve.
Yeah, okay. So let's go back to the beginning with the historical roots, like we said, over 3 centuries old. So this is not some brand new organization.
No, not at all. The history is really remarkable. It all starts back in the Ottoman Empire.
Okay.
And even before they had a formal fire department, they recognized that fire prevention was really important.
Really? What did that look like back then?
Well, the handbook points to this decree from 1579. So Sultan Murad III, he issued this for basically a royal decree to the governor of Istanbul.
Okay.
And in this decree, he set out some basic fire safety measures that every single household in Istanbul had to follow.
Wow.
Pretty amazing when you think about it. So they had to have a large barrel of water ready at all times and a ladder that was tall enough to reach the roof.
Okay.
But more than that, it actually required ordinary citizens to get involved in firefighting, so not just to stand by, but to actually help put out the fires.
Yeah.
So even back then, they recognized that everyone had a shared responsibility when it came to fire safety.
That's really interesting and surprisingly proactive, I would say,
Right.
for the 16th century. So we have this initial focus on prevention. When did things start to get more organized, more like an actual firefighting force?
Well, this is where the story takes a really interesting turn. The real push for a formal organization came thanks to a Frenchman named David. He actually converted to Islam, and he became known as Gershek Davut, which means real David. Okay.
And he was an engineer, and really crucially, he engineered and built the first fire pump in Istanbul, a really effective fire pump.
Okay.
And this new technology really showed its worth. I mean, it was really effective in putting out fires in key locations like the Imperial Armory and the artillery factory.
Wow.
Imagine that. Suddenly they had this machine that could actually pump water with real force.
Yeah. So one person with the crucial invention really kind of changed the whole landscape.
Absolutely. His pump was so effective that Sultan Ahmed III and his Grand Vizier, Damat Ibrahim Pasha, they ordered the establishment of what they called the Tulumbaki Oka. This is like the pumpmen corps.
Okay.
And this was established within the Janissary Corps, the elite infantry of the Ottoman army.
Mm-hmm.
And this all happened in the early 18th century. And the handbook makes it clear this is like the true beginning of the Istanbul Fire Department. So firefighting now became an official responsibility of a major military force. Wow, pretty impressive. The Janissaries were a really powerful group, so for a while, firefighting was actually integrated into their duties.
It was for a pretty significant period, yes. But the Janissary Corps itself, they faced a lot of internal issues. They resisted modernization. And in 1826, under Sultan Mahmud II, the whole corps was actually disbanded.
Wow.
And as a direct result of that, the Tulumbaca Okavu was also dissolved.
Okay.
So this led to a more sort of decentralized approach to firefighting where different districts in Istanbul formed their own pump teams.
It sounds like maybe that was kind of a step backwards in terms of coordination.
It may well have been, and the handbook points to the Great Hoka Pasha Fire of 1828 as a real example of why a more unified firefighting force was really needed.
Okay.
This was a massive fire that really showed the limitations of having all these separate district-based efforts.
Right.
So the response from the authorities was to create a pumpman battalion within the newly reformed military.
So swinging back toward centralization, but still within the military framework.
Right.
Okay, what happened next?
Well, later in the 19th century, during the reign of Sultan Abdulaziz, the Istanbul municipality and the city management were being set up, as modern administrative bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And they started forming their own dedicated pump teams, which were known as derely or departmental teams.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that a lot of these firefighters, they actually had regular day jobs within the municipality, but at night they would live in designated pumpmen's quarters.
Oh, wow.
So they were ready to respond if a fire broke out.
So it's almost like an early version of a professional on-call system.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
However, another big fire really sort of highlighted the need for even more change, and that was the Great Beyoğlu Fire of 1871. This one happened in Beyoğlu, which was a more Europeanized district of Istanbul.
Right.
And this fire really showed just how inefficient and limited the existing firefighting arrangements were.
Yeah.
I mean, the scale of the destruction was just enormous, and it was clear they needed a more professional, a more coordinated approach.
Right. So that's where the Hungarian expert comes in.
Yes. So Sultan Abdulaziz, he realized they needed a truly modern fire service. And so he invited this guy, Count Udon Székely, a famous fire expert from Hungary. And he came to Istanbul to lead this modernization effort. And he was actually granted the rank of Pasha. This is a very high military and administrative title.
Okay.
And Székely got to work straight away. And in 1874, he established the Istanbul Fire Brigade Regiment. And this included both land-based and naval firefighting units. So this brought, a whole new level of organization and training to the force.
Okay. So a Hungarian expert lays the foundation for the modern fire brigade. It's such an interesting international connection. It really shows how much emphasis they were putting on modernizing.
Absolutely. And the handbook notes that the fire service continued to operate as a directorate under the municipality for another 74 years.
Mm-hmm.
But then finally, on October 10th, 1997, it became a department headship within the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality, which is what it is today.
Got it. Okay. So this evolution from those early royal decrees to the, sophisticated organization they have today is pretty remarkable.
It really is.
And the handbook specifically highlights Gersek Davut, of course, and Udon Székely.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about their individual contributions. Gersek Davut, the French engineer who converted to Islam. It's a pretty unique story.
It is. And as we said, his introduction of the fire pump was just revolutionary. And his engineering skills and the effectiveness of his invention were so valuable that he was actually appointed the Ser Tulumbakianya Dergâ Ali, which means head of the pumpmen of the Sublime Porte. This is an incredibly important and prestigious position, recognizing his fundamental contribution.
Yeah. And then there's Udon Székely. His commitment to this organization was, it was extraordinary. 52 years of service total, 48 of those in Istanbul.
Yeah.
It's almost half a century.
I know. What's really impressive is just his dedication. He arrived in Istanbul in 1871 at the request of the Sultan to set up and train this modern military fire brigade. And initially, he thought it would only take about a year. But then in 1877, Sultan Abdülhamit II gave him the title of Pasha.
Okay.
And in response to this huge honor, and his commitment to the work, Székely resigned from his position in Hungary, and he decided to stay in Istanbul.
Ah.
And he continued to lead and manage the Istanbul Fire Department until he died in 1922.
Wow. So he basically dedicated his life to building this organization.
He did.
Yeah. The handbook also has this section on the tulumbakiler, those Ottoman-era pumpmen, and it just gives you this really vivid picture of how they operated back then.
It does. So the tulumbakiler, they were the main force in firefighting in Istanbul for a very long time. And the establishment of the Tulumbaka Okado, which, as we said, thanks to Gersek Davut, really marked this turning point in how fires were dealt with.
Okay.
They were the first responders. They were responsible for putting out the fires and also rescuing people.
So how did they actually work, on the ground? It must have been so different back then compared to modern firefighting.
Oh, yeah, totally. So they relied on these strategically placed watchtowers all over the city.
Okay.
So the watchtowers would spot fires first.
Makes sense.
And once the alarm was raised, the tulumbacular would get ready, rush to the scene,
Okay.
and they would carry their hand-pumped water apparatus and, all their essential tools.
Right.
And often, they had to travel really long distances through the city, which was very densely built.
Yeah.
And so they developed this system of rotating teams so no one got too exhausted. They could maintain a fast pace to get to the fire.
Makes sense in a sprawling city like Istanbul. And were there specific roles within each Tulumbaka team?
Yes, absolutely. They had a very clear division of labor.
Okay.
So the Uşak, they were the pump carriers. They carried the hand pump on their backs. The Fenersi was the leader and the guide. They carried a lantern, especially at night or if it was smoky, to light the way. The Buruku was the guy who actually carried and operated the hose to spray the water on the fire. The Kokenchi would brace the end of the hose, the ad that the Buruku was using, to kind of help manage the water pressure.
Okay.
And then the Hortumku would handle the rest of the hose, making sure there was a continuous water supply.
Okay. So it sounds like a surprisingly well-organized system for the time.
Was, yeah.
And they had a great rallying cry, too.
They did. Their rallying cry was Yaman Gelerizi, Yaman Gederizi, which translates to, we come fiercely, we go fiercely.
Nice.
And the handbook explains how this really reflects their bravery and their commitment to protecting Istanbul, which, at that time was mostly wooden buildings from these devastating fires.
Right. Okay. So moving on to the present day, the Istanbul Fire Department is a very large, very complex organization with, a huge range of responsibilities. And the handbook gives us a really good overview of how it works today.
It does, yeah. It's pretty impressive, the scope of what they do. It really reflects what a modern city in the 21st century needs. And the handbook actually lays out their mission, which is to deliver proactive services that meet the standards of modern local governance, but also to protect the city's cultural heritage.
Okay.
So their vision is to be a leading local administration that contributes, a global value in urbanism and civilization through sustainable and innovative solutions.
So it goes way beyond just putting out fires.
It does.
Yeah. What are some of their key responsibilities?
Well, of course, they have fire intervention, but they also do, comprehensive training for their personnel. They have public awareness campaigns about fire safety. They coordinate responses during all kinds of disasters. They actually run emergency ambulance services.
Wow.
They implement fire prevention and control measures. And get this, they even have lifeguard duties on the city's coastline.
Really? Lifeguards. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a really wide range of responsibilities.
Yeah. That's a big addition to the traditional firefighting role.
Yeah.
And the handbook also has this organizational chart.
It does, pages 22 and 23.
Okay.
It's a visual representation of their structure, which is, as we said, pretty complex.
Right.
But to break it down, at the very top, you have the fire department headship.
Okay.
This is where the overall vision and strategy comes from. And then below that, there's the European side and the Anatolian side fire directorates.
Okay.
So each one is responsible for operations in its half of the city.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Istanbul is divided by the Bosphorus, as you know.
Yeah. So geographically, that makes sense. What about like the support functions that keep everything running smoothly?
Right. Well, they have a whole support services directorate.
Yeah.
They handle training, communication systems, maintenance of vehicles and equipment, and also the IT infrastructure. They also operate the Disaster Coordination Center, ACO,
Right.
which coordinates the response of all the different agencies during major emergencies and disasters.
And you said that emergency medical response is actually integrated into the fire department.
It is. So the Emergency Aid and Life-Saving Directorate is responsible for providing those services, and they often work really closely with the fire suppression teams.
Okay.
They also run the Fire Training Center, ABTEM, which provides training for new firefighters and ongoing professional development.
Right.
And really importantly, they run public education programs on fire safety and prevention.
Yeah, that's so important. Public education. Okay, so what other key units are there?
Well, there's the Communication Directorate, KIA, which is focused on the department's public image and how they communicate with the public. And then the Command Center, this is like the heart of the operation.
Okay.
They receive and dispatch all the emergency calls and coordinate the responses. Then there are separate directorates for maintenance and repair of all the equipment and vehicles.
Yeah.
And logistics and procurement, which manages the supply and distribution of all the, necessary stuff they need.
So it's a huge logistical operation.
It really is. And then on more local level, you have group directorates, and individual fire stations.
Okay.
And they're strategically located throughout the city to make sure they can respond quickly.
Right.
They even have volunteer fire stations that serve more rural areas on the outskirts of Istanbul.
Wow.
And then there's an Institutional Improvement and Development Directorate, KGA.
Okay.
And their job is to make the department more efficient and to encourage innovation. They even have a Facilities Management Directorate to look after all the fire department buildings.
Okay.
And then a Technical Office Directorate, which deals with regulatory compliance, especially for historical buildings, and also information sharing with other agencies. And finally, there's the Personnel and Administrative Affairs Directorate, which basically handles everything related to the department's employees.
Got it. Okay. So it's an incredibly complex organization. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the firefighters themselves.
Oh.
The handbook talks about their rank structure and the different uniforms they wear.
It does. So the rank structure is very hierarchical, starting with the top leadership, like the fire department head, the director, and the branch manager, then deputy directors.
Right.
Then you have the chiefs and deputy chiefs, sergeant majors, chief drivers, sergeants, more specialized roles like ladder vehicle operator, and then, of course, the, corporal.
Right. And
Yeah.
their uniforms aren't just for, identification. They're designed for different types of emergencies.
Absolutely. The handbook details several types of firefighter clothing,
Okay.
and each one is designed for a specific type of incident. So you have the standard fire intervention clothing. You have more flexible rescue operation clothing for those, technical rescue situations.
Right.
And then there's fully encapsulating hazardous material intervention clothing, which they call level A, for really dangerous environments. And then level B clothing, which offers, less protection. They also have specialized gear for underwater search and rescue, regular headquarters clothing for the administrative staff, special uniforms for the Hazira SIL, which is the Rapid Emergency Medical Team, and even dedicated ACOM station clothing for the people who work at the Disaster Coordination Center.
Wow. The level of specialization in their gear really shows just how many different challenges they have to face. And speaking of gear, the section on personal protective equipment, or PPE, is really detailed. It just kind of highlights how dangerous this job can be.
It really does. And what's amazing is the technology they use to keep firefighters safe. For example, the heat-resistant clothing is made up of several layers.
Okay.
There's an outer shell that protects against flames and abrasion.
Yeah.
There's a moisture barrier that stops water and other liquids from getting through. And then a thermal barrier to insulate against extreme temperatures.
Right.
And finally, an inner lining that helps to manage heat stress and make it more comfortable to wear.
Okay. And I guess pretty much every part of their body is protected with specialized equipment.
It is, yeah. The helmets are really important for protecting their heads from impact and heat.
Yeah.
And they often have visors to protect their faces and neck protectors, for the back of the neck. They also wear hoods that are made from these advanced heat-resistant fibers that cover the face, ears, neck,
Wow.
all those vulnerable areas. And they wear goggles to protect their eyes and earmuffs in really loud environments.
Right.
And they have two main types of gloves. There are the firefighter gloves, which are really heavy duty. They're designed to resist heat and cuts.
Okay.
And then there are the rescue gloves, which are more flexible, and they give better grip and protection from rope and debris.
Right. And the boots are also really crucial for their safety.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The boots protect their feet from heat, sharp objects, punctures, hazardous liquids, and impacts. And they often have steel toe caps and reinforced soles. They even have specific rescue boots that are more ergonomic. They're designed for all the different challenging situations they might encounter.
Think so, yeah.
And then for really extreme heat, they have these aluminized suits that can actually reflect 85 to 95% of radiant heat,
Wow.
up to 1,000 degrees Celsius.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So that just gives you an idea of the kind of environments they have to work in.
It does.
And then there's the Temizhava Salunum Shihaza, the THSC,
Yes.
or self-contained breathing apparatus.
Yeah.
That's got to be one of the most vital pieces of equipment they use.
It's absolutely essential, yeah. It's crucial for providing breathable air in environments that are filled with smoke or other, hazardous stuff.
Right.
The system, so the SCBA, or THSC as they call it, consists of a backpack frame that holds a high-pressure cylinder full of compressed air. It's usually at 300 bar.
Okay.
And there's a pressure gauge, an analog one and a digital one, that shows the remaining air pressure and the temperature of the cylinder. And also, it gives you an estimate of the remaining air time. The regulator reduces the high pressure from the cylinder down to a safe breathable level.
Right.
And the lung demand valve only gives the firefighter air when they inhale, which conserves air.
Okay.
Then there's the mask, which has inner and outer components, and it has an anti-fogging treatment and a communication diaphragm so the firefighters can talk clearly while they're wearing it. And the whole system is attached to the firefighter with a harness and adjustable straps.
Wow. It's really complex. And you mentioned that some of the CBA units actually have communication systems built in.
They do. So the handbook talks about these special THSC units that have radios built in.
Okay.
This allows the firefighters to talk to each other within their team.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these units also have a frequency distributor, which means they can communicate on other radio channels.
Okay.
So they can talk to other emergency services. The mask itself actually has a speaker.
Oh, wow.
And there's a push-to-talk button on the unit.
Okay, so it's very sophisticated. So that frequency distributor, that's really key for coordinating with all the different teams.
It is, yeah. It connects the radio systems in the masks with the standard handheld radios.
Right.
So they can communicate with people outside their immediate team.
Okay.
They also use these things called telemetry devices that monitor, like, the firefighter's body temperature
Okay.
and the air level in the cylinder.
Mm-hmm.
And they can trigger alarms if, things get critical.
Right. That's an important safety feature.
Right.
And to make sure all of this equipment is working properly, they have special maintenance and testing units.
They do, yes. So they have a hydrostatic test device, which checks the pressure integrity of the air cylinders. They have a mask and backpack test device.
Okay.
And even a mask washing unit, to keep things hygienic.
Right. Let's move on to some of the actual firefighting equipment.
Okay.
The handbook shows us all these different tools. Let's start with the basics. Hoses.
Okay, well, hoses are really the lifeline of firefighting. They have these really strong suction hoses that are designed not to collapse when they're drawing water from hydrants, rivers, or those portable water tanks.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the delivery hoses, which come in types B, C, and D.
Okay.
And each one is designed to carry pressurized water or firefighting foam. They have different diameters and lengths.
Okay.
And the handbook actually gives you the technical specifications for each one, like the safe working pressure, the test pressure, and the burst pressure.
Wow. And there are all sorts of accessories that go with the hoses, too.
There are. So they use suction strainers and suction baskets that go on the intake end of the suction hoses to stop debris from getting sucked into the pump because that could damage it. Then there are hose wrenches for connecting and disconnecting the couplings.
Mm-hmm.
They have reducers, which let them connect multiple small hoses to a larger one.
Right.
And distributors, which let them split a single hose line into several smaller ones. And they even have these hose clamps called saruk. These are like temporary repairs if a hose gets damaged.
Okay.
And finally, adapters, which let them connect hoses with different types or sizes of couplings.
Right. And then there are the nozzles, or Landslar, as the handbook calls them. There seems to be a different kind of nozzle for every situation.
Yeah, you're right. So they're categorized by their main use, whether it's for applying water or foam.
Okay.
So for water, they have straight nozzles where you can adjust the flow rate, and fog nozzles that can produce a straight stream or a wide fog pattern.
Okay.
And the handbook gives you performance data for those, flow rates, throw distance, and the width of the fog.
Mm-hmm. And then the turbo nozzles are like a more advanced version.
Yes, exactly. The turbo nozzles let you adjust the flow rate, but they also have a lot more versatility in terms of the spray pattern.
Okay.
So you can get anything from a straight jet to a wide fog or spray just by twisting the nozzle head. And there are different types of turbo nozzles, like 3-stage, 4+1 stage, even ones with elbows for hard-to-reach spots. They also use trigger-operated nozzles like the Nipiro.
Okay.
These are usually used on high-pressure lines, and they can produce a jet or a spray.
Right. What about nozzles for, like, really specific situations?
Well, they have these piercing nozzles called kamalanse that are designed to go into tightly packed materials, like bales of textiles or stacks of paper.
Okay.
And they also have ground-level fog nozzles, or sukalkana,
Mm-hmm.
and these are placed on the ground to create a protective water curtain.
Wow. So that's for protecting firefighters or maybe sensitive areas from the heat and flames.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and then there are the foam nozzles, which are really important for certain types of fires.
Yes, so firefighting foam is really important for putting out fires that involve flammable liquids.
Mm-hmm.
They have these heavy foam nozzles, which produce dense foam with a low expansion ratio. So it creates a blanket over the fuel. They come in different sizes, like S2, S4, S8, and S20.
Okay.
Then there are medium foam nozzles, which produce foam with a higher expansion ratio. So it's lighter and airier, and it can cover bigger areas,
Right.
like the M2, M4, and M8 models.
Hmm.
Then they have combination foam nozzles that can do both heavy and medium foam, and they have compressed air foam, CAF nozzles, that mix compressed air into the foam to make it more effective and adhesive.
Wow. And the handbook actually gives you the specifications for all of these.
It does. It tells you the flow rates, the working pressures, the expansion ratios, and even the throw distance of the foam.
It's amazing the level of detail they go into.
Yeah.
They even have equipment for generating the phone itself.
They do.
Yeah.
They use these phone generators, which are powered by water turbines or electric motors.
Okay.
And they mix the foam concentrate with water and air to produce huge amounts of foam.
Right.
And some of these generators can also be used as aspirators, which helps to improve the quality and the reach of the foam. And again, the handbook has all the technical specifications, the voltage, the water pressure, the motor power, the foam output, and the expansion ratios.
Wow.
For applying huge volumes of water or foam over long distances, they use monitors.
Okay.
These can be mounted on vehicles or they can be portable.
Right.
You can operate them manually or remotely, and some of them even have telescopic extensions.
Okay.
And to make sure they mix the right amount of foam concentrate and water, they use proportioners or Mellinger.
Right.
These automatically mix the two at the right ratio, and they have different models like the Z2, Z4, and Z8.
It's incredible how much detail they put in this handbook for every single piece of equipment. And it even covers those smaller hand tools.
It does. So they mention ejectors, which are basically pressure regulators,
Yeah.
and flax waters or shop lock for putting out small fires.
Okay.
They have brush cutters for clearing vegetation and air ventilation aspirators for removing smoke and hazardous gases from enclosed spaces. And these come in electric, battery-powered, and even X-proof models for flammable environments.
Okay.
The handbook even explains how to configure these aspirators to extract air or to blow fresh air into a space.
Got it. And for situations where they need a portable water supply or they need to pump water out, they have these motopomplar, the portable fire pumps.
Yeah, these are self-contained pumps with their own engines, so they can draw water from different places like rivers or tanks, or they can pump water out of flooded areas.
Okay.
And the handbook lists the different brands they use, like Rosenbauer, Ziegler, and Iveco FOX the third, and it gives you all the specs, the engine type, the power output, the pumping capacity, the weight, and the maximum suction depth.
Wow, it's really comprehensive.
It is. They also have submersible pumps, which are electric and designed to be underwater.
Okay.
And again, the handbook gives you the technical details for those.
All right, so we've covered the firefighting equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's move on to the rescue equipment, which is a whole other category. And hydraulic rescue tools are a big part of that.
They are, yeah. They're essential for getting people out of vehicles or collapsed buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So you usually start with a hydraulic power unit.
Okay.
These can be powered by gas, electric, or even batteries.
Right.
And they provide the pressure to operate the rams and the cutters and spreaders. The handbook mentions brands like Weber, Lucas, Homatro, and Jaws, and it tells you all about the motor power and the operating pressure.
Okay. And the cutters and spreaders are what people usually think of as the jaws of life.
Right, exactly. So the cutters are like shears that can cut through metal, and the spreaders have arms that can pry apart crushed vehicles.